Assalamualaikum and hi. Welcome to Rapera Youth on Rapera TV. Here we highlighted the contribution and talent of our young people. And today, here with us is the author of the book Altruism Out The Window, Arif Imran. Hi Arif, how are you Arif today?
Hi, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you Alhamdulillah. So Arif, today we're going to discuss about this book. And I guess the first question is that, if I'm not mistaken, you wrote this book at the age of 17 years old. So what made you wrote a book at the first place?
I wrote a book for the reason which I don't think many would find very amusing. It's not that interesting of a reason.
Right, try us.
Really, for the sake of expression, like you know how day to day people like to have conversations with different people, you know, having a talk. In the same way, I've got the urge of expression that I could. You know, of course, I do talk to people. You know, I have discussions with them. The contents of this book, face-to-face discussions, even online discussions with strangers as well. But really, it's that urge of expression that got me to express my own views on paper, you know, and it just formed a book. That's why I wrote a book, actually.
All right. So can you tell us briefly what this book really about?
As per the title, it's Altruism Out The Window. So it's about altruism, which is, in other words, selflessness. Of course, when you talk about selflessness, you would also talk about the opposite of selflessness, which is selfishness. And indeed, that's what this book is about. It explains, and if you see the subtitle, which is The Misconceptions of Self-Sacrifice as a Virtue, that explains a lot about what this book is about. It's about, you know, we all misunderstand that self-sacrifice or selflessness as something that is, it's a virtue, you know. But without even going into that context, you know, my book argues that selflessness and altruism does not even exist in the first place. You know, so let's not even talk about whether or not it's a virtue. You know, for virtue to exist, it must exist in the first place. You know, but I'm saying that it doesn't exist, and that's because each and every one of us have got our own motivations for doing things, and at the end of the day, we do not act, or we do not omit to act for the sake of, you know, complete a purpose that is not purely for the sake of others. You know. There's always self-interest involved, and I'm saying that it's not a bad thing. It's just the way it is. We've got to accept it, and this book goes on to talk about that.
Just the way it is.
Yes, the way it is.
Right. But you mentioned that the title, Altruism Out of the Window. So meaning, does it give the idea that selfishness is good? Are you saying that?
Very interesting question, because that's something that I've clarified from, I think, even the introduction, if I'm not mistaken, of this book, that my definition of selfishness in this book is slightly different from the societal and understanding that our community may have of the word or the concept of selfishness. In our community, in our society, when we talk about selfishness, there's a negative connotation attached to that word. You know, and that negative connotation is that an act or behavior that is taken for the pure benefit of yourself at the expense of another human being.
Okay. All right.
So the negative connotation being at the expense of another human being. However, that part is, I argue in my book, not selfishness as in the literal meaning that I'm taking in this book, but rather I use another concept, another word to represent this at the expense of another, and a behavior that you take for your own benefit, or for your own benefit at the expense of another, as a behavior that is foolish and not selfish. So that is the distinguishing definition, the line that I draw between the definitions in this book.
I think, Arif, along that line of question, in your book, if I'm not mistaken, it's in chapter 4 that state regarding to happiness. So when we sort of gauge between these two words, happiness and altruism, does it exist within the same realm? Or is it an entirely different thing?
Absolutely, because when you talk about altruism and selfishness, at the end of the day, everything comes back to you, to whether or not you are benefiting, or you're losing, gains and losses. We're talking about in those terms. So obviously, because altruism in the definition itself means that you're doing an act for the sake of others,
Yes.
without any self-benefit, seeking nothing in return. You're not getting anything in return. That's altruism. That's self-sacrifice. That's selflessness. And when we talk about benefits, benefits in itself is worthless. It's worthless unless you can sort of, I'll say, resonate with the emotional aspect of a person. Because at the end of the day, gains are good when it makes you happy. The counterpart, being losses, is what makes you unhappy. So gains make you happy, losses make you unhappy.
Sad.
Yeah. So that is absolutely ties into the concept of altruism, selflessness, selfishness.
So it exists.
It
does
exists.
exist.
Yeah.
Understand? So like in this book also that you mentioned that helping other people alone is not enough, and we need to know if that person has the capacity to accept help. So what do you mean exactly by the excerpt of, forgive me if I am paraphrasing your words. So what does this excerpt actually mean?
I think I know what you're talking about. You're talking about a chapter when I'm talking about because in this book I have spoken about the concepts of give and taking.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's not so much strictly in helping, but rather in helping people, not helping people, in giving people things and taking what you want. So it's, yes, you are helping in a sense. When you're giving something, we often think that when a person gives you something, you're being helped by the person who's giving you something, but we're forgetting that the person wants to take away something as well. And that's the key point. If you want to take away something, so that's what I argue in my book, the concept of give and take. Without giving, you cannot take.
True.
Which means giving, the person has to accept it. By giving, it's a two-way process.
Yes.
A person gives, a person takes. And then you take, a person gives, and then a person takes. So it goes two ways. So when you're talking about taking, the person giving must have consideration as to the person's capacity in taking. And that's not just a consideration the giver has to take into account. There's a consideration the taker has to take into account. Give, for example, a situation, a poor family. They need the help, but they don't have a driver's license, assuming they don't have a driver's license. Now this guy wants to come along and do charity. He then awards or gives this BMW car to this family. But he's forgetting that this family, number one, doesn't have a driver's license. Number two, he's giving a BMW car. Probably the road tax and maintenance fees would kill their finances even more. They won't be able to afford their lifestyle. So these are considerations in regards to financial capacity in being able to take something. On the other hand, the giver who gives the car to the poor family, what are his motivations in giving the car? His motivations is to help that family be better off. However, what he's doing is instead burdening the family financially, which means that he can't achieve his objective of helping the family. So he's not taking away what he wants from the deal, so-called deal.
He's giving more problem.
He's giving more problems, not giving help. So it goes against his own purposes. So that's why it's very important to take into account the capacity in taking, not just financial capacity as in this case. It can also be a factual knowledge, capacity. The same way that a doctor may have a medical qualification from his medical degree to practice medical science, he may not have the factual capacity to advocate in a court of law.
True, makes sense.
And because of that, because it does not have a factual capacity, he would also not have the legal capacity required for him to perform the job.
I think like from that point, I think we can relate to the next question, in which you mentioned in chapter 2 regarding to the process of happiness, where the first part, the first step, forgive me, you said that there must be a perception of values. And the next step is where there is a material benefit or emotional benefit. So can you explain more about this process?
Yes. In achieving happiness, we've got to acknowledge, and I think by now it's common knowledge that each and every one of us have got a different way of achieving what we want, of obtaining what we want.
Yes.
And we do what we do because we believe that leads us to happiness. So this is a breakdown. It's an observation, and I break it down into three parts. The first part being perception of value. Because each of us are different, we perceive a different value in doing certain acts or in not doing certain acts. So in our minds, we are assigning weights to this various activities. Let's say the act of playing basketball may be heavier in the sense that it achieves more happiness than, let's say, the act of doing your homework. That's a very simple way of putting it. But perception of value affects what you choose to do and what you choose not to do. And because if you choose, let's say an activity brings you, that you perceive as being highly valuable. Valuable in what sense? What benefit does it bring you? So that comes into the second component of that chain that I wrote in my book. A material and or an emotional benefit. So let's start with emotional benefit. It's easy then.
Right.
Emotional benefit. When you, let's say, eat ice cream. You eat ice cream, you put it in your mouth. The act of enjoying that ice cream brings you emotional happiness. You feel good. The coolness, the sweetness in your mouth. You feel good, and that achieves happiness. Achieving emotional benefits or obtaining emotional benefits directly achieves happiness.
Okay, makes sense.
So, what is material benefit? I'm sure we have all heard of people throwing around the word. Very materialistic fella. Money. All he cares about is materials. He wants a big house. All he cares about the cars. Money. Yeah. So, yes, materialistic, but we are forgetting that materials on its own are, in a sense, worthless. If you don't enjoy what you have, it's worthless. If you don't use the facilities you have, it's worthless. Let's say you have a car. I mean, you can have 10 cars, but if you don't drive it, then it's worthless. You're not enjoying the car. In the same way that if you have money but you don't spend it, what's the point of having money? If you have all the monies in the world, but you can't spend it.
Yeah, it's like sitting collecting dust.
It's like collecting dust. Yeah, you're not converting it into emotional benefit, thereby achieving happiness. Yeah.
In that aspect, I think this is an additional question. Would you rather have a lot of money and yet be sad, but if you can be homeless but you're happy, how would you like narrate that situation?
Before we even go into that, the very fact that the person has a lot of money but is sad means that it goes back to the very core concept of selfishness. In society, a person who ends up in that situation will be labeled as selfishness with the negative connotation attached. He probably did something he shouldn't have done to achieve what he wanted.
Probably messed up one way.
Messed up one way or another. So he's probably sad because there's some guilt maybe attached to the money that is obtained. He can't enjoy the money.
True.
So is that his decision to go on that path of so-called wrongful behavior and immoral behavior to achieve what he has achieved? Is it a wise decision? Is it an intelligent decision? Is it a selfish decision? Selfishness, I define in my book in the literal sense. It's a decision you take to make yourself happy. But it's the decision that this person, in this situation we're talking about, he did something wrong to achieve that money. Is he happy in the end? No. So he did something wrong. So he was foolish. He was not selfish.
True. Understand. So like in all of our discussion, can you like briefly state to the audience like what's the actual meaning of altruism?
Altruism is selflessness. You are having no regard to your own interests. To help another person. You want to help another person even at the expense of yourself. So that is what altruism, the concept of altruism, is like the definition that we all regard it as.
All right. Last question, Arif. You explain in the first chapter, if I'm not mistaken, regarding to an idealist and a believer. So, what is actually these two? Are these two similar or they are quite different?
Yes, it's a concept that I drew up on the introduction of the book, which segued into the first chapter.
Yes.
It's a very large general division of people into two groups in the context of altruism, in the context of selflessness, and people who, I wouldn't say advocate, but people who think that altruism is good. These are the two camps of people very generally. The first camp is of course the idealist. The second camp is the believer. So idealist can mean many things. An idealist can be anything. But I'm contrasting it with the believers. So believers, when you talk about believers, it gives you a feeling that these guys are
religious.
Believers, yeah, religious, and they're a bit. There's an emotional aspect to it. The belief in something, not on sole reason. It's an emotional. It's some people say spiritual part of it. I believe in something, and that belief often, religious personals or maybe their parents may have imparted that beliefs on them, and they're taught probably not to question those beliefs, and they're taught to just live with it. So they probably do not question it. It's just an emotional thing. My parents taught this to me. I must guard it, and I must follow it for the rest of my life. So those are the believers, very emotional. So the idealists, if I'm contrasting it with the believers who are largely emotional, the idealists, I am trying to take the approach or trying to take the impression that the idealists are a group of people who have an ideal, and they come to that ideal, that realization of the ideal, in the sense that through a logical and rational route. So it's like 1 + 1 = 2. That very logical, very mathematical.
Yes, true.
Yeah. So their logic is that if I help another person, now that person is now he has received help and is now better off. So now he can go, if he goes on and help another person, and if that person goes on to help another person, and if this cycle continues indefinitely, eventually the world will be devoid of people needing help. Everyone will be happy. Everyone wins. That's their logic. So that is the camp of idealism. The idealists, very rational creatures.
All right, thank you, Arif, for that insightful discussion regarding to your book. From us on Rapera Youth, we wish Arif well on his future endeavor in youth studies overseas. And also from us on Rapera Youth, we implore the audience to be a thinking and compassionate citizen. Thank you and have a nice day.